The Wolf's Lair, Hitler's Eastern Front headquarters in the forests of East Prussia, was the scene of a major argument on the night of the 7th of February 1942, when someone dared to tell Hitler the truth about the war. The man who yelled at Hitler was none other than his trusted and admired Minister of Armaments, Dr. Fritz Todt. Todt, who also was head of the vast civil engineering organization that bore his name, had been responsible for the Reich's astounding building projects, from the construction of the famed Autobahn motorway system to the building of both the Siegfried Line and Atlantic Wall defenses, and the less well-known Eastern Front defenses, the Pomeranian and Oder lines. His brown uniformed army, Organization Todt, also employed hundreds of thousands of slave and forced laborers. Todt controlling 1.4 million workers to complete the giant construction projects. But despite all these defenses, Dr. Todt realized early on that Germany could not win the war, particularly the war against the Soviet Union. He realized that the armed forces needed better equipment and supplies if it was to crush the Soviets, and in February 1942, following Hitler's failure to capture Moscow at the end of 1941 and force the Soviets to the negotiating table, he told Hitler to make peace with Stalin before it was too late. Naturally, such sentiments expressed by one of his closest confidants was not well received by the Führer. The following day, Fritz Todt was dead. The question has been since the 8th of February 1942, did Hitler have Todt killed? Even today, over 80 years later, historians can't completely rule out foul play. However, Todt's death was witnessed by many people and investigated by several organizations. So here are some of the facts. February at the Wolf's Lair was very cold, the ground covered in snow. Todt was to fly out of Hitler's airfield at Rustenburg back to Berlin-Tempelhof. Also at the Wolf's Lair was the man who would succeed Todt, Albert Speer. Much has been made of Speer's presence at the Wolf's Lair and Todt's mysterious death following his argument with Hitler, but it should be pointed out that Speer had only managed to get to the Wolf's Lair on the 7th of February by unorthodox means, and was lucky to have made it. Speer had been given a lift aboard SS General Sepp Dietrich's personal aircraft because Speer's train had been stopped by snowdrifts. Todt had decided to fly back to his headquarters in Berlin on the morning of the 8th of February 1942 aboard his personal plane, a Heinkel HE-111 passenger version of the famous bomber. But this was in direct contravention of Hitler's regulations. The Führer, concerned for the safety of his senior leaders, had decreed that officials were only to fly in a plane with not less than 3 engines, such as the Junkers Ju-52. Hitler's Air Force adjutant, Nikolaus von Belau, drew Todt's attention to this regulation as the minister prepared to leave. But Todt complained directly to Hitler that this regulation did not apply to him, and Hitler actually told von Belau to turn a blind eye. The aircraft Todt boarded was a Heinkel 111 of the Führer Kurierstaffel, a stable of transport planes kept for the personal use of ministers and their staffs as they flew from Berlin to Hitler's various headquarters. Apart from Todt and his personal secretary Helford, the other people on the plane were all Luftwaffe crew. Pilot Lieutenant Albert Hotz and 2 NCOs Unteroffizier August Karl Hauptmann and Oberfeldwebel Karl Breuer. The HE-111 had already made a test flight earlier that morning without any problems. However, the weather was bad, with fog and poor visibility closing in, and it was difficult to discern the line between the ground and the sky, both appearing grey in the poor light. The pilot, Hotz, had only limited experience on the HE-111. Nevertheless, Hotz taxied the Heinkel out, lined up on the runway, and successfully lifted off, only to explode moments later. The explosion theory is in fact incorrect, though it does appear in many history books and magazine articles, as it gives the impression that the plane exploded in mid-air, suggesting a bomb, when that is not what actually occurred. Lieutenant Hotz had begun the climb to altitude when it is clear that he realized it was suicidal to try to continue with the flight under such adverse weather conditions. still quite low to the ground at around 90 feet. Hotz banked the Heinkel round to begin a return to the runway at Rustenburg, but for some reason, perhaps the confusing visibility conditions or his own inexperience on the type, the Heinkel impacted the ground half a kilometer from the airfield near the village of Wilhelmsdorf, exploding, killing everyone aboard. Hitler's personal pilot, Hans Bauer, suggested the cause of the crash as being the accidental activation of a self-destruct charge fitted as standard to German military aircraft. So in the event of a landing behind enemy lines, the crew could prevent the machine from falling into enemy hands. This 1 kilogram explosive charge was stored behind the pilot's seat and activated by a string toggle. On courier flights, Todt would sit beside the pilot in the cockpit. Bauer suggested that Todt may have accidentally triggered the explosives whilst clambering into his seat, activating the short timer, which then detonated 2 minutes into the flight. But the only problem with Bauer's hypothesis is the fact that Todt's plane did not carry a self-destruct charge. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, suspected foul play, believing that 2 British SOE clam mines captured by the Germans had gone missing from Abwehr stores prior to the crash. Canaris suggested that the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, the SS security service, was behind Todt's demise, perhaps on Hitler's orders. However, such an assassination would have required at least a few days to organize and implement, and either Hitler had decided to kill Todt before the tempestuous meeting on the 7th of February, or Canaris's supposition was simply a paranoid theory. Some have suggested that Albert Speer, who succeeded Todt in his posts, was part of the plot. However, Speer had only managed to get to the Wolf's Lair on the 7th of February by hitching a lift on someone else's plane. And incredibly, he was due to fly with Todt back to Berlin on the 8th, but overslept, missing the flight. It was convenient that Speer was at the Wolf's Lair on the 8th of February, allowing Hitler to immediately elevate him to replace Todt, but it doesn't feel part of a well-planned plot, but rather a coincidence. Hitler ordered Field Marshal Erhard Milch of the Luftwaffe to conduct an investigation into the Todt crash. No evidence of sabotage was found, said Milch, a highly experienced fighter pilot who concluded, quote, "The weather was not good, the sky and the snow-covered ground equally grey, the line between them conceivably invisible. I suspected human error by the pilot, who wasn't as yet sufficiently familiar with the plane in difficult weather conditions." End quote. The Reich Air Ministry and the SS both investigated the crash, but their detailed files have been lost since 1945. If I was to put my money on it, I think that the nature of the crash, on the edge of a snow-covered airfield in overcast conditions, the aircraft under the control of an inexperienced pilot forced to fly against his own better judgment by his powerful boss, suggests human error rather than a nefarious plot or even mechanical failure. The pilot banked the Heinkel over to return to the airfield, misjudged his altitude and the poor visibility, and flew into the ground. Plenty of senior military and party leaders had heated discussions and even arguments with Hitler during World War II, and lived to tell the tale. Hitler did not operate his leadership style like Stalin's, which is a common mistake made by an awful lot of people. Rather, he embraced the Prussian General Staff model of open discussion of military problems and the airing of uncomfortable opinions, arguing often with his military commanders, and often spending a lot of time trying to persuade them to his point of view. It was only after the July 1944 bomb plot against Hitler that people became leery of disagreeing or arguing with Hitler at meetings. Todt's widow and daughter believe that Albert Speer was involved somehow in Todt's death, but no evidence has ever surfaced to prove this. Speer was an unpleasant careerist who happily stepped into Todt's jackboots, but his movements, both before and after Todt's death, do not suggest he was part of a plot to kill the Armaments Minister. Todt received a full Nazi state funeral and was buried in the Invalids Cemetery in Berlin, though his grave marker was later destroyed by the Soviets. However, at the Alten Friedhof in Berchtesgaden, where his wife and daughter are buried, he is remembered on a large memorial stone today. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.